So if you notice, you do not have a single x or a single variable. You just have x squared in numbers. You can solve it with the square root method, and that by far is the easiest out of any of these. This is going to be the second way to solve a quadratic, and this way is going to kind of be spread out over a couple of different lessons. So this is the second way, and this is, we are still solving quadratics. So we are still solving quadratic equations. So we still have the same basic type of equations. We still going to notice we have x squared, which means I'm probably going to get how many answers? 2. Now as I look at this way, this is kind of the second way we're going to talk about. This way is called solving by factoring. So this is way number 2. Solving by factoring. So I think this should go pretty well for you because the factoring tests went well for most of you. So this is the second way to solve a quadratic, and this is called solving by factoring. So the order I'm introducing this is the order that you want to check this. First check, can I use the square root method? That's the easiest. Then move on and say, okay, can I solve it by factoring? Okay. So a couple things you need to have here. First of all, you need to make sure the equation is equal to 0. So the equation has to be equal to 0. So a little different than the square root. The square root, you end up with x squared equal to a number. Solving by factoring, you want to get the equation equal to 0, which means move everything to one side. Sometimes that will already be done for you, sometimes it won't be. So we want to move everything to one side. So each one of these ways has kind of different ways that you have to set them up. So quadratic, or solving by square root, you get x squared equal to a number. Solving by factoring, you move everything to one side and get it equal to 0. Okay, let's go ahead and look at an example, and I will go through the steps as we look at the first one. So first example, the directions are going to say solve again. So we are solving, so that means I'm trying to get x equal, like what number does x equal is what we're trying to figure out. So if I look at the first one, let's look at one like, okay, let's look at one like this. 6m squared plus 12m equals 0. First of all, what type of equation do I have? Quadratic, because I have m squared. So the first way I want to check is I want to say, can I use the square root method? Can I use the square root method for this?
Yeah.
No. Why can I not use the square root method? There is this m right here, so this is important. Pay attention, guys. This is why you cannot use the square root method, because this 12m. I have a single m, so I cannot use the square root method. So then I move on and I say, can I factor this? So step 1, first of all, we need to make sure it's equal to 0. Is this equal to 0? Yes. Sometimes that will be done for you, sometimes it won't be. Make sure your equation is equal to 0. Everything is on the left side. Okay? So first step, step 1. Check to see if you can factor. Okay, so get it equal to 0 and then check to see if you can factor. You will not always be able to factor quadratic. That is just the method, one of the ways you may be able to solve it. If you cannot factor it, we are going to have a third option. But factoring is how we check after square root. If you cannot do square root, say, can I factor it? Get it equal to 0, and then check to see if I can factor this. So if I have 6m squared plus 12m equals 0, if I look on the left side, which is where everything is, can I factor that left side? If I want to factor something, I always look for what first? GCF, thank you. So is there a GCF for the left side?
Yes.
What is it?
6.
6m. So this is why factoring is nice, because factoring allows you to solve these type of equations. It's kind of another resource to allow you to solve these types of equations. So if I take out a 6m, what do I have left? M plus 2. Now, one property of algebra tells you that if I have two things multiplied equal to 0. So let's think about this. Let's think about why I can do this. 6m times m plus 2. If I have two things multiplied to give me 0, what do I know about one of those things? Let's think about this. I want you to understand why we can do this step. What's the only way I can get 0 if I'm multiplying?
By 0.
Something by 0. So if I'm multiplying two numbers together, one of those numbers have to be 0 to give me 0. So what do I know about one of these things in order to get me 0 when I multiply? What do I know about 6m and m plus 2 if they have to multiply to give me 0? Do what? What do I know? One of these have to be what in order to multiply to give me 0?
Negative.
No?
Positive.
Think about it. You just told me this a minute ago. The only way to get 0 is for one of the numbers to be 0 when you multiply. So what do either 6m or m plus 2 have to be to give me 0 when I multiply? 0. So we are going to take 6m and m plus 2 equal to 0. The reason we can do that step, a lot of you just do it, and I want you to understand where it's coming from. The reason we can do that step is I am multiplying two things together to get 0, and I know, because it's basic knowledge, that one of those things has to be 0 in order to multiply to get 0. Or both of them could be 0. So we're going to take them both, 6m equal to 0 and m plus 2 equal to 0. Which makes sense because how many answers should I get with the quadratic? 2. So now I have two equations that you know how to solve. How do I solve 6m equals 0? 5. So m equals 0. I basically turned it into two equations that we know how to solve. M plus 2 equals 0. -2. Minus 2. M equals -2. So my two answers are 0 and -2. How can I check? If I solve an equation, how can I always check to see if it's right? No matter if it's quadratic or linear, it doesn't matter what type of equation. How can I always check an equation to see if I have the right answer? Plug them in. If I plug in 0, 6 and 0 squared is 0 plus 0 is 0. If I plug in -2, -2 squared is 4 times 6 is 24 minus 24, which gives you 0. No matter what type of equation it is, you can always plug them in to see if it equals the right side. Okay, and that would actually be, here, let me write this here. This is step 2. I forgot to write it. Step 2 is that each factor equal to 0. And when I refer factor are some things that are being multiplied. So we set 6m equal to 0 and m plus 2 equal to 0. So step 2 is you set each factor equal to 0, and then you just solve the equations. Okay, any questions on that?
No.
Okay, let's look at a couple more examples. Next one, example 2. What if I have one like 4n squared equals 16 positive 16n. So what if I have 4n? That's a positive 16. What if I have 4n squared equal to a positive 16n? First of all, what type of equation is this? Quadratic. This is n squared, so this is quadratic. So we're going to have to choose which of the ways I want to solve this. First way we always want to check to see if I can use is what?
Square root.
Can I do square root on this one? No, because of the 16n. I cannot do the square root because I have the n. I have a normal n into the first with the 16. Cannot do the square root. I move on to factoring. So now I need to know, can I solve this by factoring? Well, before I can see, I have to get my equation equal to what? 0. What do I do in order to get it equal to 0 or move everything to one side? What can I do to move everything to one side? No? Subtract 16n. If I divide by 4, that will still leave n squared on the left side. I want to get everything on one side. That will get it equal to 0. So 4n squared minus 16n equals 0. I tend to move things to the left side. It doesn't really matter. You will end up with the same answer, but I just tend to move everything to the left side. So before I can see if I can factor it, I have to get it equal to 0. Any questions on that? Now let's check. Can I factor the left side? Well, the first thing I always try to factor out is a what? Is there a GCF for the left side?
Yes.
What is it? 4n. So I'm going to factor out the left side. So get it equal to 0, and then see if you can factor it. n minus 4. Just like we did last unit. Now this is not solved. This is factored. It's not solved. So I need to do what with each of my factors? Okay, so one would be what? And the other would be n minus 4 equals 0. Yep. And then you have two simple equations. Divide by 4, n equals 0. Add 4, n equals 4. And those are my two answers. Okay. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. So that should help you get started on the next section. So 11 through 20.
Are we going to do another section today?
We'll see.
No.
We'll see. We'll see how long this next section takes you.